Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker. Derek Gilbert hosts Skywatch TV and co-hosts the weekly video program Sci Friday and Unraveling Revelation with his wife, author, and analyst Sharon K. Gilbert. Derek's the author of the groundbreaking books Bad Moon Rising, The Great Inception, Last Clash of the Titans, The Day the Earth Stands Still with Josh Peck, and Veneration with Sharon Gilbert. You can find out more about them at gilberthouse.org or skywatchtv.com. Joining us now, as he does on the second Monday of every month at the 11 o'clock hour, to host this edition of Exploring the Sensational and Supernatural is our good friend, Derek Gilbert. Derek, good to see you, my friend.
Same here, Rabbi. It's always an honor to be on your program.
So, surprised at the outcome of the election?
Not really. I was born and raised in Chicago, so we're kind of used to things like this coming from Democrats. My mother volunteered as a Republican election judge in our precinct in Chicago when I was a kid, and she would tell stories about how many votes were coming out of our precinct, which always was more than the number of adults who lived in our precinct. So this is a very old, time-honored tradition, and both parties engage in it to some extent. But considering that most of our major cities are under the control of Democrat machines and have been for decades, it's not really a surprise. I think 2016 caught them by surprise. I don't think that they thought they would need to work as hard as they had to get Hillary over the top. They believed what their pollsters were telling them, and I think the same thing happened again this time. We can talk about that because Democrats, all things considered, really didn't have that good a night last week Tuesday. It really did not go well for them. The apparent election of Joe Biden notwithstanding, but so no, I really wasn't that surprised. In fact, there were some who called it and predicted that this would happen, that it would appear that President Trump would have a lead when we went to bed on Tuesday night. And indeed, that's what happened. It looked like he was going to carry Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Arizona. And suddenly we wake up the next morning and say, wait a minute, they're now all blue? What's going on here? Well, there's some statistical anomalies. There's something called Bentons Law, which I found out about over the weekend. Forgive the camera, by the way. I think my light-colored shirt combined with the fluorescent lights in here are making it appear as though we're having a lightning storm inside the office.
But this is a very ethereal show. This is the sensational supernatural. So we're going to call it a visitation and interference and
just be the cheap webcam, one or the other. But anyway, this Bentons Law is something that's used to show statistical anomalies in a data set. When you've got a large group of numbers, which of course you're getting when you're trying to compile the results of an election tabulated for wards and precincts and counties in a state, you get a whole lot of numbers that need to be added together. Bentons Law found that when you analyze large groups of numbers, the probability that any single number will begin with the numeral 1 is about 30%. The probability that any numeral beginning with the number 2 is somewhat less, and number 3 is somewhat less. So you get what looks like a downward shaping curve. And most data sets, unless they've been massaged, will follow that distribution of numbers. And when you look at the results for President Trump's returns, they pretty much follow Bentons Law. However, when you look at the results from certain precincts, especially in Milwaukee, Philadelphia, you find that the curve, when you plot it out, the numbers beginning with the numeral 1, 2, 3, 4, you actually find a bump in the numbers beginning with the numerals 3 and 4, and then it drops back down again. In other words, statistically improbable. Now, bear in mind, Bentons Law is used to detect fraud in accounting. So it's highly likely that something very unusual is going on with these returns. Having said that, being able to prove it in a court of law is something else again. So that's why I think the media today and over the weekend, once the Associated Press decided to declare Joe Biden the president-elect, the media is following suit, and it's why the Biden campaign is today making announcements of staff members for the transition team. They're creating the perception that this is already settled. They're creating the perception this is already settled. Now, we go back 20 years, George W. Bush and his team did the same thing in 2000. While the vote recount was still going on in Florida, that continued on for 42 days, as you recall. This was to give the impression that George W. Bush had already been elected and that any change would be overturning the will of the people. Perception in politics, as in advertising, perception is reality. So that's why the Biden campaign is doing this. The difference now as compared to then is that this time it's the candidate that the media wants, who apparently is the elected or is the president-elect. Let's say presumptive president-elect. He's not the president-elect yet. That doesn't happen until the states ratify the votes and choose their slates of electors for the Electoral College. That doesn't happen until the second week of December. So we've still got a month to go before Joe Biden is officially the president-elect. But for the media, you can see the media calling him that now because, again, they want to create that perception. So the media's tone has changed very quickly. We were talking just before the program about the coronavirus vaccines that are under development. As you know, today Pfizer made an announcement that their new vaccine is showing real promise, 90% effectiveness in preventing the disease. The stock market, led by biotechnology stocks, is zooming. And suddenly, hey, the orange man has been defeated and happy days are here again. That is what I see happening. The political class and its servile lapdogs in the mainstream media are busy creating the perception that this is all done, it is set, Joe Biden will be the next president, and everything is going to be fine. All of this mess up until now was all the fault of Donald Trump. And you don't have to go back very far to see how the media has shifted on that particular issue, the coronavirus vaccine. It was just a couple of weeks ago that presumptive Vice President-elect Harris and prominent Democrats like Governor Gavin Newsom of California, Governor Andrew Cuomo of New York were saying, well, we're not going to take any vaccine developed under a Trump administration. But suddenly Pfizer comes out after Election Day when Biden is ahead, and suddenly, hey, it's great news. The virus is on the run. Everything is going to be fine. This is to create the perception that Biden has won fair and square, and that any challenges in court are being led by conspiracy theorists, sore losers, and would be overturning the will of the American people. That's what they want us to believe. Now, again, I am very skeptical. I think the bottom line, Rabbi, is this. Whatever happens between now and January 20th, whoever is sworn in on January 20th of 2021, half of America will believe that the man being sworn into the office is illegitimate. And that's a dangerous place for America to be.
It is. In the natural, all these things are going on. But you and I both know the sovereignty of God is he sets up kings and he tears down kingdoms, and that nothing happens that does not advance his agenda. And if you kind of recap the last 4 years, a lot of barriers were broken down in the Middle East, a lot of acknowledgement for the statehood of Israel, for the capital being moved, for the Golan Heights sovereignty, for annexation of settlements, new peace accords being developed, and us withdrawing from certain bad relationships. So the stage was set for Israel to become preeminent in biblical prophetic setup. And noticeably absent from that were the primary players of the Ezekiel 38-39 alliance, which were Turkey, the former Soviet Union, and Iran. Now you have Joe Biden come into play, who wants to return to a relationship with Iran, who wants to return to a global agenda, to rejoin the climate accords, to kind of join back in when many of the setup things that had to take place for prophetic alignment had to happen in order to prepare for this next step in the advancement of God's agenda, which is to advance the return of Messiah, the campaign of Armageddon, the rise and identification of the son of perdition. All those things had to happen this way because 4 more years of Trump might not have moved the prophetic agenda forward. It may have stalled it, and although we saw many good things happening in the Middle East, we also saw that 2 of the very great conditions of Ezekiel 38 were starting to be fulfilled. One, Israel was becoming at peace with their neighbors, and 2, Israel was developing caches of silver and gold. Now, the silver and gold were black gold, oil, and the silver were the silver pipelines of gas from Leviathan. So, in context, silver and gold would have been the amalgam. It would have been hordes of gold bars and ingots of silver, but this is one of those times where we have to contextualize and then advance into a 21st century construct and say, what does that look like today? Well, they're not amassing bars of gold. There's no natural gold reserves, but there are black gold reserves. And so we see some of the things that 5 years ago we could not anticipate ever taking place in the Middle East happening, where Israel could reach a peaceful arrangement with their neighbors. And that's a prerequisite. So as I've watched this unfold, I always have to have, as you do, what's God's agenda, what's the American agenda? And they can't be competitive. God's sovereign. It has to go his way. So how will he use this? And I think you and I have some insights into how we've seen it done in the past for the advancement of a particular agenda. Are we seeing a repeat, a replay of those sitting and dining at the table who were once not dining at the table?
I think so. I think the important thing to remember is that God wasn't surprised by any of this, and that while the principalities and powers that are moving their pieces on the chessboard are playing a multi-dimensional chess that we can barely understand, God is playing in infinite dimensions and is not constrained by linear time. That's something that Sharon incorporates into her fiction series, the Redwing Saga, and very brilliantly. This will be a key element in the plot going forward, is the attempt by these fallen Elohim who've rebelled against God to try to break out of the barrier, the time lock into which God has trapped them. He sees the end from the beginning. We do not. We are moving across the page left to right, top to bottom, as we go through history. And so are these Elohim. God sees the entire book at once. So he is not fooled, he is not deceived, and whatever comes, and that's the important thing to remember when we look at the things that are happening. It's easy for us and natural for us to be frustrated and angry at what we perceive to be the theft of the election by a political party. But it's Sharon said something to me very wise over the weekend. She said, if God is allowing this, it's only because he's getting ready to do something. So let's pray and then stand back and marvel at what he is about to do. Now, it might not be pleasant for us. We American Christians have had it pretty good, all things considered, compared to where our forefathers have had it, and especially compared to where our brothers and sisters in China and the Middle East and Iran and a number of places in Africa, Nigerian Christians are being slaughtered on a weekly basis. So we've had it pretty easy. And this might be the time when God says, okay, kindergarten Christian is over. It is time for you to graduate to boot camp. About 10 years ago, a fellow attending a conference, first one ever that I spoke at, asked a really good question. Where are the modern catacombs? If we are heading into a period like the first century church had to endure, where they had to meet in secret in the catacombs of Rome, catacombs in other major cities across Europe to avoid detection by the authorities, what's the modern equivalent? We Christians have become so used to being able to openly practice and profess our faith, although we're getting more pushback in recent years, we can still do this. Where do we go? What are the modern, maybe now is the time we need to start developing the modern catacombs. And I know that there are friends of ours out there who are working along those lines. But I think in the back of our minds, we always think, well, yeah, okay, it's getting a little uncomfortable, but it's really not that bad yet. Well, we're the frogs being boiled by degrees. But having said all that, again, God knew this was coming, and he has raised us up and placed us in this time for his purposes. For whatever reason, he saw fit to place Rabbi Eric Walker, Derek Gilbert, Sharon Gilbert, Carl Gallup, Zev Porat, Tom Horn, et cetera, in this place and in this time for his purposes. So this is the time to really get excited because we're getting close to the end. You know, we're on the relay team, and we've got the baton. And I'm not sure, I don't know if we're the one who's supposed to cross the finish line, but we're getting pretty close. So we need to kick it up a notch. And that might mean things, at least in terms of our creature comforts, get a little, we have to do with less than what we had been used to. But remember that the things that are awaiting us in glory will make what we're going through now seem as nothing. So again, it's easy to get caught up in the natural realm, and I think the media presents our political races deliberately like this way to get us hooked, to keep us stressed and angry, and fighting one another. And I think that's a spiritual aspect of this as well, Rabbi. I think that we are provoked through social media and the way our news is presented to be angry at one another, to keep us divided, so that we are not coming together in unity. Because if we're fighting one another, we're not paying attention to the real enemy. Now, to those who aren't seeing this through a biblical lens, who have not accepted the gospel of Jesus Christ, they have scales on their eyes. They're not going to see the spiritual dimension, or if they see it, they'll see it incorrectly. We Christians really don't have an excuse. We need to step back and look at the principalities and powers to the best of our ability, try to discern what they're pushing us toward, and then reject that. You know, the old baseball manager Leo DeRocher was credited with saying, "Nice guys finish last." Well, no, I reject that. Nice guys are running a different race, or Christians are running a different race. We are running a race, as Paul wrote, but it's not the one according to the rules of this world. If we lose this election, if we lose political power, if we lose a majority in the Senate, we are still ambassadors for the kingdom, which is where our citizenship lies first and foremost. And if we're angry, if we've allowed social media, if we've allowed meme posters on Facebook, if we've allowed the latest ridiculous commentary from talking heads on various cable news channels to provoke us to anger, we're really not capable of being very good ambassadors, because for much of the world, the only gospel they know is what they see in us. And if what they see is anger, well, why would they want any part of that? So that's the challenge for us, to remember we're running a different race. It's not about the Supreme Court, although these things are important, clearly. I mean, the political realm dictates how we live our lives, and we certainly want our nation to be righteous in terms of its laws. But first and foremost is our citizenship in the kingdom and our role as ambassadors for that king, for our king.
There's obviously a great sifting going on because you can't have half of America, 50% on each side of this equation, with 70-something percent saying that they're Christian. So it's not all Christians on one side and non-Christians on the other. So within the body, there's going to be a wheat and the tares. There's going to be a redemption of some kind, culling. The lukewarm are going to be spit out. We're going to see the collapse of some traditional churches. we're watching the implosion of several denominations over the LGBTQ plus agenda. This will only further advance that divide. And when you come down to it, the catacomb was our home. We were sent home on March 15th, and that's where we were supposed to go back to. The Deuteronomy 6:5 through 9 instruction was to teach your children, to talk about them when you talk about God, and when you rise up and when you lie down. And those that embraced it did so. They began homeschooling. They began teaching again. They began Bible studies. They began to form small groups and say, okay, we can't meet at church, but we can get 8 or 10 people at home, and we can start and we can dig in and we can go deeper and build stronger, and we can get to recognize who's in and who's on the periphery. The mega churches, we're seeing named people. And that's why there's not an Eric Walker Ministries, is because it's a big enough target on my back. The higher you go, the bigger your name. That's ones that fall, and when they fall, it's national news, it's global news. You have this worship leader from Hillsong falls. It's global news because they made a global name for themselves. Well, this is a national black eye for Christianity, that doesn't matter you're a Christian, you're still a human being, you're still subject to temptation, you're still subject to sin, there's no inoculation, but you ought to examine your own relationship with the Lord. Search me, O God, and see if there's any unclean thing within me. But we're seeing some great names coming under attack and some changes in structure taking place. This is by God's command. This is by God's sovereignty. Is that, look, I let you go. When prayer went out of school, I expected you to continue it at home. You didn't do it. When marriage equality, you didn't preach in the church that marriage is between a man and a woman. And you didn't have 71% of the Christian population having that as part of the foundational truth of their faith. It became negotiable. It says we've got to be tolerant, we've got to be inclusive. And all of a sudden, that's not the gospel Jesus preached. Jesus was not inclusionary. We have this odd, skewed picture of who Jesus was. He was confrontational. He called evil, evil. And the Bible tells us, woe to him that calls good evil and evil good. And so we're in this season, and it's been a long one, seemingly. In the larger scheme of things, it's a very short one. But we're seeing that the family was called to step up and bring it back home. And the family didn't step up and bring it back home. Not say all of them, but many of them. So this election tells you that those who are self-professing Christians that were voting for an agenda that included abortion and included same-sex marriage, that those two issues alone were not enough to say that I am more committed to the Bible and to Messiah than I am to tolerance and to sin. This was Adolf Hitler's agenda. He was more committed to his sin than the body of Messiah was committed to the Lord. And therefore, he did not get pushback from the churches. The Catholic Church was complicit. The local churches, knowing what was going on, you can tell me, I stood in Auschwitz. I could walk down the street into the city of Krakow. I could hear, I could shout and hear the trained line ran right through. You could not help but hear and see, and the pastors were silent. And so we did go silent. We did go dormant. We allowed the intimidation of 501c3, oppression. Oh, don't bring politics in the pulpit because you're going to get arrested. You're going to get charged with this. And all of a sudden, we were non-essential services. When the federal government and the state government says the church is non-essential, it's a non-essential service, that is an absolute statement as to where we stand in affecting our communities. And we lost our position as the head when we were designated as a non-essential service. A liquor store, a nightclub, a protest on the street, those were essential services. We were rendered and labeled as a non-essential service, and therefore were under government control. In our lifetime, did we ever see that happening?
We wouldn't have thought so, but we need to remember that we are, well, there's no better way to phrase it. I'm going to steal a phrase, but I'm going to at least give credit where it's due. A young man named Abraham Hamilton III, who's the legal counsel for the American Family Association and a host on their radio network, says, what happens in your house is more important than who's in the White House. And that's something that we have forgotten. Even if they say, look, the church is not essential. All right, well, the first century church was not only deemed non-essential, they were deemed threats to national security because they wouldn't bow down and worship the emperor. And this continued until the early 4th century. Diocletian, just prior to Constantine, executed the most intense persecution of the church in the history of Christianity, at least in European Christianity. Let's put it that way. I would say our African and Chinese brothers and sisters say, hey, we're still being tribulated out here. But the point is, we need, when we are forced to go underground, whether it's in the catacombs or inside our own homes, we need to make sure that we are still teaching our children and training them up in the way they should go. And when we don't, well, it's no surprise that our nation is going the direction that it is, because enough people don't accept the authority of the Word of God to want to base their lives or our laws on His Word.
We're talking with Derek Gilbert, as we do on the second Monday of every month at 11 o'clock for this edition of Exploring the Sensational and Supernatural. It's a free-form discussion about what was, what is, and what is to come. And we look to the past at the Nimrods and the prophets of Baal and the fallen Elohim, and we look to see how that plays out in the influence of the principality wars that are going on right now, and being able to call it for what it is and see that there's a pattern and that God is just, and as He has done in the past consistently, He looks at the hearts of the people and He gives them a king that's reflective of the hearts of the people. Wicked people get a wicked king. Good people, godly people, get a good, godly king. If you take a look in the Bible, there were not that many good kings. And so for us to have an expectation that we can support same-sex marriage, we can support the legislation of LGBTQ plus rights, we can support abortion, is a nation that has drifted away and deserves to be recognized by God as a nation who is a part of the great falling away. Now, that's a falling as a process. That process doesn't have to be, it's like it says that the iniquities will visit upon the third and fourth generation. Doesn't mean it sets up residency. It says it'll visit. You have somebody come to your home to visit, they're not moving in. And so we have an opportunity during this period of the great falling away for us to not be a part of that, to choose to opt out of that, and to grab a hold of reigniting a reawakening, a revival, a time of renewal, a time of return, a time of repentance, and putting it back into perspective that says that God has always reserved for himself a remnant. It's not the 140 million Americans that voted is the remnant. The remnant is a subset of that, and that remnant is powerful if we will clearly join together for unity among the remnant. It's not a call for global unity, that's globalism. We're calling for unity among the body of Messiah, who's committed to the Word of God and to the biblical truth of the gospel, the Holy Spirit, and the Messiah that Paul preached, and sticking to that as the plumb line, that anything different than that is to be rejected. You and I stand firm in that among those who are our peers, and so that gives me great hope that we together can move mountains. If a little coronavirus, much smaller than a mustard seed, can infect the world, imagine what that mustard seed of faith can be used to take back certain portions. We're certainly not going to stop prophecy from unfolding, but on which side we're on when the count is made, I know, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about the ancients. We're going to talk about the prophets of Baal. We're going to talk about the fallen Elohim. We're going to talk about even Nimrod and how some of this plays into what's happening today, so we can learn from the past so that we can take a look at what's happening present and future. We're going to take a short break. We'll be right back. Shalom. I'm Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker, inviting you to join me and my special featured guests twice per month with Rabbi Zeb Parat and Carl Gallups, and monthly with Dr. Michael Heiser, Dr. Michael Lake, Dr. Timothy Jennings, Dr. Mark Baker, Dr. Jeffrey Johnson, Drs. Michelle and Mark Sherwood, Dr. Kim Moss, Derek Gilbert, Peter Rosenberger, Brandon Gallups, Steve Fair, Stephen Black, and Sean Tabbitt for in-depth insights into Israel, prophecy, the unseen realm, the brain, spiritual warfare, overcoming shame, mysteries of the Bible, prophetic insights, the sensational and the supernatural, caregiving, addiction recovery, understanding the divided heart, same-sex attraction, and much more. We're proud to feature some of the greatest biblical minds from both Israel and around the United States. Check out our featured guest lineup and 24/7 feed on ignitinganation.com, or watch by topic on any device with our free apps. If you can't find what you need, you're just not looking in the right place. Follow us on social media and download our free apps today.
With today's smartphone technology, news, information, sports, and entertainment is widely available and almost unbounded. But what about the information that believers in Yeshua are looking for? Well, now there's an app for that. Igniting a Nation now has apps available for Android and iPhone. With our app, you'll gain access to everything you would in our website, from our featured guests to our live streaming shows. Visit Google Play or the Apple Store and download Igniting a Nation's new app today.
Shalom. I'm Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker, inviting you to join me and Israel's #1 rated guide, Edo Canaan, for our annual Israel trip. Our 2022 trip is now open for registration for our 18th trip to Israel. Our trip will take us from Tel Aviv to the Galilee, down to the Dead Sea, and 4 nights in Jerusalem. You will walk where Yeshua walked and watch the Bible turn from black and white to living color. Visit ignitinganation.com/events and download the registration form today. No, it's not too early to take advantage of our payment plan designed to fit any budget. All of our trips sell out, and we want you to experience this life-changing journey. Registration is now open for April 2nd to 13th, 2022, and we promise you, you will never read your Bible the same way again. Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker, and as we do on the second Monday of every month at the 11 o'clock hour, we meet with our good friend Derek Gilbert from Skywatch TV to talk about the sensational and the supernatural. Derek, welcome back.
Thank you, Rabbi. One of the things that's struck me about the results of this selection is that Donald Trump had really worked to extricate the United States from some entanglements overseas that really weren't in the best interest of the American public. The Paris Climate Accords, for one, which really, even its supporters admit, really wouldn't do anything. Joe Biden has announced that he'll get us back into that post-haste. But another thing is something that has been put forward by Klaus Schwab, who is the founder and president of the World Economic Forum. This is the group that meets at Davos, Switzerland every year. Bankers, financiers, movers and shakers in the political realm, the media will gather. It's sort of like the Bilderberg group, but a little more open and public. It appears, now Mr. Schwab for a long time has been arguing for something he calls stakeholder capitalism, which, when you really drill down into what he's talking about, looks to me an awful lot like medieval feudalism. Get rid of the middle class, make us, the middle class, dependent upon our lords and masters for their largesse, their dole, if you will. You know, they will grant us security as long as we promise to pledge our fealty to them, work their fields, and turn over our goods to them for them to dispense as they see fit. They're essentially trying to freeze their position as the global elite in place, eliminate the possibility that us upstart middle-class people might someday earn our way into that category, and keep us from getting any notions of self-determination. The American experiment, they're trying to put an end to the American experiment. And the coronavirus gave them a perfect opportunity to take this idea and make it mainstream. Time magazine, on its international edition this past month, featured the Great Reset, which is the program that Mr. Schwab is pushing. This is based on a book written by a gentleman named Richard Florida a few years back, very consistent with the ideas that Schwab has been pushing for decades. The idea that we need to fundamentally transform. It's a familiar phrase, isn't it, from the Obama administration? We need to fundamentally transform global society, economy, social structures, education, and so forth, and essentially turn it into a top-down government structure. No more governance by the consent of the governed, but government of the masses by our betters, who would then determine an equitable distribution of goods and services so that we all receive, the same. In fact, the week before the election, Kamala Harris had tweeted out a video that she had narrated, a little animated video talking about the difference between equal opportunity and equitable distribution or equitable outcome. And the point is that wherever you start in life, you should arrive at the same place, which sounds like a great, noble idea until you realize that in terms of abilities, all people are not created equal. In terms of God's love for us, yes, we are created equal. All human life is equally precious to the Lord because we are his imagers, his image bearers on this earth. Regardless of our abilities, cognitive or physical abilities, we are all equally precious to God. But in terms of our ability to earn a living or perform certain tasks, or suitability for certain functions. We are not all created equal. If that were the case, me at 5'11" would have been, the starting center for the Los Angeles Lakers. Because, all right, well, it's unfair that Shaquille O'Neal or, should make millions of dollars as a professional basketball just because he's tall and athletic. And because I'm short and slow and can't shoot, that's just not fair. All you have to do is watch any athletic competition for more than a minute to realize all people are not created equally. Some of us can speak more eloquently. Others can write with more stylistic prose. Others are better mathematicians. Others are better at painting or artistic endeavors. We are not all created equal. And so this idea that we should all arrive, not all of us have the same work ethic. Not all of us have the same powers of concentration or ability to focus on a specific task. But to say then that we should all arrive at the same place regardless of where we start, it's like, now, wait a minute. That means those of us who are willing to work hard and save our money should give it all to the state so that they can take it and give it to others who are not good at working with their money and who don't work very hard. This is why the early colony at Plymouth in Massachusetts, the Pilgrims, nearly starved to death in their first winter here because the married men were compelled to give up the fruits of their labors, the produce that they grew in their fields, so that it could be distributed to the entire colony on an equitable basis. And they realized, wait a minute, now I'm working to feed, or the single men rather were upset because they were having to feed the wives and children of the married men. And say, well, look, I'm going to get the same amount regardless of whether I work hard or don't work at all. And so everybody did as little as humanly possible to get by, and suddenly nobody had enough. That's why communist systems, socialist systems always fail. And yet that's what the World Economic Forum and its Great Reset is pushing. And I think Kamala Harris, with that ad, was signaling to the World Economic Forum and these global financial elites that she's on board with the program. But I think more than that, because I don't think she's really the one calling the shots on her own campaign and her own platform. I don't think Mr. Biden is really calling the shots. I think really there's a Praetorian Guard, if we want to look at Rome and the principalities and powers of that pagan realm, in the latter stages of the Western Roman Empire. The emperors were weak. They were controlled by the Praetorian Guard because the soldiers whose job it was to protect the emperor realized that they had a very powerful position. We can protect the emperor as long as he does what we want him to do. If he stops doing what we want him to do, then he'll have an accident and fall onto a bunch of swords. It would be like the Secret Service basically calling the shots for whoever is the next president of the United States. I think there's a group of political elites, the deep state, if you will, pulling the strings of Mr. Biden and Ms. Harris, and they will be the ones controlling it. This, to take this now into the realm of the supernatural and the realm of the ancients, gets us back to something that I contributed for the book that Sharon and I just published. It's coming from the printer, should be out in a couple of weeks, called Giants, Gods, and Dragons. And I think I've talked about this before. This is a drive to bring us back to Babel. And I'm not just talking about a one-world kingdom. Nimrod was the first to try to establish this kingdom. There's a period of history that archaeologists call the Uruk expansion, U-R-U-K. We call that land today Iraq. This city-state, which is down near the Persian Gulf, controlled everything between the Tigris and Euphrates as far away as Turkey back during the 4th millennium BC. Now, I'm using their dates just for convenience sake. I know this doesn't track with a literal understanding of the dates of the Bible, but just for convenience sake, between about 3800 BC and about 3100 BC, this city-state, 700 years, dominated the lands between the rivers. Archaeologists have discovered that the way they can tell if an archaeological site, a new dig site that's stumbled onto by somebody, they can tell if it comes from this period of history by the presence of something called the beveled rim bowl. It's a little bowl made of white clay, very crude, was not fired in an oven. There's no decoration on it. You can still see the thumbprints of whoever molded this 5,000, 6,000 years ago. It's probably made on a mold just formed in the earth, on the dirt. And there are dozens, hundreds, sometimes thousands of them found at these archaeological sites because they were essentially throwaway, single-use containers, sort of like the 5,000-year-old equivalent of a styrofoam fast food container. It appears, based on the evidence, the fact they found so many, and the fact that the symbol for bread in ancient Sumer, the land of the Sumerians, is this bowl, a little picture of this bowl, and the symbol of to eat in Sumerian is a picture of a human head with one of these bowls at its lips. It appears, based on the evidence, that the kingdom founded by Nimrod, or at least expanded by Nimrod, is known for these bowls because the working class, the serfs, were given a daily ration of barley and oil. It's like, here's your food for the day. Go out, work in the fields. Come back in and bring the stuff to the temple, and we will sacrifice it to the goddess Inanna. That is what the World Economic Forum wants for our future. They want to send us back to the time of the beveled rim bowl. Universal basic income, Rabbi, is nothing more than the 21st century equivalent of Nimrod's beveled rim bowl. Here's your government allotment. Go spend it on stuff. Go play on the internet or whatever, and just go be your passive little loyal servant, and just leave all the hard decisions to us, your betters, your masters. That is what the World Economic Forum calls a sustainable future. Universal basic income, equitable outcomes, and transferring us all from a cash-based economy, and we're most of the way there already, to a new digital currency. And again, the coronavirus is providing the perfect excuse for this, because we need a faster, more efficient way to get financial aid to the people who need it. And cash, obviously, well, cash is dirty. You can transmit the virus with cash, but not everybody has a bank account. So we need to set up a new system where everyone is connected, and a new currency that is strictly digital, bypassing the banks, bypassing governments, going straight to the people, the mark of the beast. I mean, you don't even need to be a believer in end times Bible prophecy to see how this would be really useful to a future one world government, because if every transaction is connected to their system, there is no privacy anymore. Whatever you spend your money on, somebody in government will know it. But if you do believe in end times Bible prophecy, this should make you wake up, because central banks around the world, the Federal Reserve Bank, the Bank of England, the European Central Bank, are all investigating ways to make this a reality using blockchain technology. That's the digital programming behind Bitcoin and other digital currencies like this, cryptocurrencies. They're trying to find out ways to make their own and have it rolled out by 2025. So the World Economic Forum, the Great Reset, new digital currencies backed by central banks, all of this is coming together, taking us back to Babel and the digital 21st century equivalent of the beveled rim bowl for our daily ration of gruel.
What's so fascinating about all of this is the concept of fiat. There is no sovereign, financially secure country in the world, with the exception of one: China.
This is really fascinating to me. I just have an undergrad degree in economics, so I want people to understand that I'm not speaking with the authority of somebody who participates in high-level financial wizardry, as it were. But it seems pretty clear to me that this type of financial servitude is clearly the mark of the rider on the black horse, the third rider of Revelation chapter 6. And this is one of the reasons that this is in the book, Giants, Gods, and Dragons. A good portion of the book, almost a quarter of the book, deals with the four horsemen of the apocalypse and who we believe they are in terms of being literal entities and not just symbols of conquest and war and poverty and famine. We believe the rider on the black horse, who carries in the Greek it's zugos, which is usually translated into English as scales. Actually, everywhere else it's used in the New Testament is translated as yoke, like what you put over the neck of an ox to harness it to the plow. And we're already, many of us, yoked in financial servitude through student loans or credit card debt, even mortgage loans, when you realize that these loans are stretched out over 30 years so that banks can securitize them. They've got your house as collateral. They package a bunch of mortgages together, sell them to other investors. If you have a mortgage, how many times has the bank that services your loan changed over the course of the mortgage? We've had ours for 5 years, and I think it's changed twice already. That's because it's being resold as an investment to others. But they do the same thing with student loans, because those can't be discharged except in rare cases through bankruptcy. In fact, there's even a case here just a few years ago where American life insurance policies were being packaged and sold as securities to investors, and German investors sued Deutsche Bank because Americans weren't dying fast enough for their investments to pay off. The point, though, is that this type of financial servitude is evident of the rider on the black horse, because it will lead to an impoverished nation. It is when, as we see in the Bible, the people are allowed to benefit from the fruits of their labors, and they give willingly of the fruits of their labors to the Lord, to their neighbors, that you prosper. When we are dependent on a government handout, you're going to get the same regardless of how hard you work. People stop working, and suddenly there's not enough. And besides, the people who are controlling things will be lining their pockets. Human nature being what it is, that's just how the system works. So this is Bible prophecy coming to fruition in front of our eyes. We argue in the book Giants, Gods, and Dragons that the writers of Revelation 6 have been loose since the 1st century. And we make that case based on the arrival of the Lamb in heaven between the guardian creatures, the cherubim, and the one on the throne. We know from the epistles that Jesus was at the right hand of the Father in the 1st century. It doesn't seem plausible then that there would be the angel crying out, "Who is worthy to open the scroll?" Well, okay, we've known where Jesus is since the 1st century. The scroll was opened then. We believe the first 5 seals have been opened. Seal number 6, which is the great earthquake, will be next, and we think that's when we are removed from here. So, and I bring that up to get to the real point here, which is not that we should be afraid of what we see unfolding. There is a tendency among humans, and Christians are not immune to it. I myself find myself falling into this as I go through the news each day. It's like, can you believe what they've just done? Well, yeah, God saw this coming. He's not taken by surprise. When we see these things happening, Jesus told us what to do. Look up, because our redemption draws near.
Amen.
That's as we see these things unfolding, remember, rejoice, because it means he's that much closer.
That is the 1 Peter 3:15 hope you are supposed to have. Your best life now, blah. I say blah. I say that's a bunch of baloney. This is your worst life now. Your best life is yet to come, when you can rule and reign with the Messiah. And so for me and for you, this is the only hell we're going to ever know. It's short-lived. Our days are numbered. I have an expiration date. It's on the bottom of my foot. I can't find it, can't read it, some kind of code. But it's all temporary. But yet it is so fascinating to watch prophecy unfold, connect the dots, and find great hope and comfort that God is sovereign. This is all a part of his plan. You can resist, you can complain, you can bellyache, but it's going to happen with you or without you. Derek Gilbert, seen here on the second Monday of every month at the 11 o'clock hour. Follow him at gilberthouse.org or Skywatch TV, and look for him right back here on the second Monday of next month. Derek, love to your bride. We hope to see her with you on the release of the new book, and we bless you for all that you do, and we appreciate your friendship so very, very much.
God bless you, Rabbi. Honored to be here. Always enjoy our conversations.
Thank you. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, we'll bring you the next edition of Revealing the Truth.